So I'm going to tell you my full name is Julia Victoria Semen Iriarte Benavente. I was born in the island of Guam in 1959. My parents are Lorenzo Leon Guerrero Iriarte and Lucia Semen Iriarte. I grew up in the village of Tamuning, Guam, but every summer my parents would take us to Saipan. So I actually grew up in Oliai, Saipan, and Tamuning, Guam. I've got a couple of stories about World War II. The first one is about my grandmother, Akoba McGinnis Igabor Semen. The story is July 15 or June 15, 1944, right? That's the day we call D-Day. The American forces were fighting with the Japanese forces, and there was bombing and shooting, and our people were running into caves. And the story is my uncles and aunties and my mom were running into caves, and my grandmother was the last one. She wanted to make sure that all 7 of her children were in the caves. And before she got to a cave, she was shot and killed that day, in that moment. And, you know, we never figured out if it was an American bullet or a Japanese bullet. We just all figured, hey, it's a bullet, and war is terrible for everybody. You know, so there are no enemies in war. It's all sad. I wish that I had known her. You know, she raised 7 children. From the knowledge that I've learned through my mom and her sister and her brothers, she was a very beautiful woman who worked hard. She worked in the farm. She knew how to fish. My mom, having 5 brothers and a sister, more of a tomboy, she grew up playing softball, became a nurse and married, and of course raised us. But that relationship that she had with her mom, she knew her for 29 years, I wish I had known my grandmother. Just the stories from my mom of how she was such an enterprising woman, you know, raising children, surviving a lot of hardship. You know, war, like I said, it's not a enemy versus a friend. It's a sad situation for everyone, especially the people who live here. But here we are in times of peace. Let's hope it stays that way. Yeah, right after the war, my mom, she was 26 at the time, or 25, 1945, so she would have been 25. The Navy hospital nurses went around the Pacific, in Guam, Palau, some of the Micronesian islands, and recruited women to become nurses or trained as nurses at the Guam Naval Hospital. So that's where my mom, she was recruited from Saipan with several other Chamorros and Carolinians, and moved to Guam for several years, and in that time she met my dad. And she was 29 years old when she married him. He was 19 years old. He was working in the Guam Naval Hospital as a corpsman. My mom used to say, oh, the corpsmen, you know, they mop the floors, they empty the bedpans, they're the low guys on the totem pole. And my mom was a nurse. And so she said, I didn't even look at your dad twice because he's a corpsman and I'm a nurse. But, you know, love is blind, and 5 years later, she married him and quit her nursing career for good, raised 9 kids. I'm so glad she stopped working, because without that nurturing and love, I don't think I would be the person who I am today. Just an opinion, but yeah. It's because of that, the story, right after the war, she met my dad. My dad had a sad story in Guam, where he was born and raised, but my mom really didn't have sad stories about being born and raised on Saipan, even during the war and after the war. Not sure why. The way of life was different on Guam than it was on Saipan during the war and after the war. So she was born in 1920, so you think 24, right? 23, 22? Yes, yeah. And she learned to speak Japanese quite fluently, because that time it was run by the Japanese, right? The islands were run by the Japanese government. So it was all Japanese language schools, Japanese businesses. Yeah, so unlike Guam, it was an American territory. Big difference, yeah. She became a nurse because there was nothing else after the war. She knew that she wanted to do something with her life. She was the second oldest in a family of 7, and she looked around and said, wow, you know, our island's in ruins, what am I going to do? My mom taught me how to cook, how to till a field, how to fish, but I want to do something more. And so when she was given the opportunity to go to Guam, she said, I'll go to Guam, never thinking she was going to marry someone from Guam. Because in those days, it was tough to be from Saipan. Yeah, if you were from Saipan, the stories that I heard from my aunts and my mom, it was not a very friendly environment towards Chamorros from Saipan. And again, it must have had to do with the war. Because like I said, things were different in Guam and then in Saipan for whatever reason. But I'm so glad that she gave me the opportunity to come to Saipan every summer and meet with my cousins here, because we would swim every day, go to the beach, and fish every day. So, but then on Guam, you'd have to drive in a car and get to the beach. So it's very different. I'm grateful to my mom. She died at the age of 99. She would have been 100 just a few months later. But I'm glad that I got the chance to hear all these stories about her life as a young lady growing up in Saipan and then marrying my dad on Guam. And she had quite a lot of hardship. But, she persevered, and I draw a lot of strength from her. My husband was a lieutenant governor at the time, Diego Benavente, and he and John were about to have the vision of recording, preserving history, because it's so much a part of the CNMI, World War II history, and the history of all the administrations that came before the U.S., the German administration, the Japanese, the Spanish administration. All of this made us who we are today as a people. So yeah, it's important. I think this is an awesome facility. I would bring my kids here. I brought my grandsons here, so continue hopefully to bring more grandchildren. But it's a cool facility. My kids always get a kick out of their Auntie Diana, and my grandkids, Auntie Diana. So yeah, that's her. She's starting. She was only like 11 years old. She's now in her 30s and has a son of her own, and she brought him here and took a picture in front of that. So it's been pretty cool. They think they're movie stars. Yeah. I think our stories will always be important. Like I said earlier, we need to tell our kids about the history of how our islands came to be what they are now. I mean, we would not be enjoying this had it not been for sacrifices made by both the Japanese and the American forces and our people. So it's important that stories are told over and over again, so that I think kids can not only learn to appreciate their life now, but also understand other people's lives, other cultures, and why people behave the way they do. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's different. And so I think kids need to learn culture and history so that they can understand differences and tolerate differences and be kind to the differences that are around them. Because a lot of it I see now in the world is there's differences and very little understanding. I see a difference, whether it be color, religion, or anything else, and yet there's no attempt to understand. I understand your color is different, I understand your culture is different, but I like the kids to understand any culture, any history is important to learn so they can tolerate each other and be kind to each other. That's what my mom would say, just be kind. World War II history has been part of the Mount Carmel School, especially with President Galvin Guerrero. They published a book, says We Drank Our Tears. My mom's in that book too, with my other daughter, Dolores, about the story of her mom, how she was fatally shot that day. And I think the history of World War II has a lot to do with where I worked at MBA. We promoted the history of World War II with the Japan market in particular, because many of the elderly in Japan remember that. Then the population is shrinking for that demographic. And I still think the young should learn the history. The young Japanese and the young islanders and the young Americans should learn the history of these islands, because we're part of America. And I keep telling that to our partners in the federal government. We're part of America. We're not a foreign country. So, keep us in mind when it comes to development and to funding for things we need to do here in Saipan or the CNMI. So history is important so that we can learn moving forward. We got to do and remember what we did back there and then move forward in the right direction. I would hope, don't you?